You've probably had this happen to you. You're getting ready to get in your hot tub. You open up your cover and you notice either a really foul smell or maybe a moldy kind of mildew smell, or maybe you're not smelling anything, but you're noticing some black splotches on the underside of your cover. What is that? How do you prevent it from happening in the future? And how do you get rid of it right now? That's what we're talking about in today's video. Hi, I'm Jeff Campbell from Hot Tub Owner HQ, and I'm glad you're here with me. So the environment in your hot tub, if I can say, it's obviously warm, but it's also moist. I know some of you probably hate that word, but it is the perfect breeding ground for mold and mildew, and especially on the underside of your cover, which of course faces your hot tub's water 90% of the time. And especially if you're not on top of your water chemistry, that means poorly conditioned water is inches away from the underside of your cover. But even if you're perfectly on top of your hot tub water chemistry, this can still happen to you. And in fact, in a minute, I'm going to show you some signs of it on my cover. And as you probably would guess, I am fairly good at keeping on top of my hot tub's water chemistry. And of course, with the hot tub cover closed most of the time, there's not good ventilation under here. So whatever is in the water, and especially in the steam coming off of the water's surface, gets trapped right underneath your cover and eventually sticks to your cover. And that's what's causing the problem. Now, first of all, you want to get rid of anything that looks like it could be mold or mildew, right? And it's probably a good idea to be wearing gloves and some sort of eye protection. And what I like to do is use a product like Tilex or some sort of mildew remover like you might spray around your shower in your bathtub. And I like to spray it directly on here. However, a word of caution, I don't want that to then drip into my hot tub's water. So the ideal scenario is to take your hot tub cover completely off, leave it with the underside facing up, spray it down with this stuff, allow it to sit for at least 30 minutes, and then wipe it clean with a sponge or a towel or a rag. Then, when you're sure there's no more residue left on your cover, it's safe to put it back on top of your hot tub. Now, while you've got the cover off and you're inspecting it, that's also a good time to check and see if it feels like there might be some water trapped inside of the vinyl, or in my case, polyester sleeve that the hard foam inserts are put into. Because especially if you have an older cover with any kind of tears or rips, or if the zipper is not in good condition, water can actually get inside of there, mold and mildew can grow inside of there, and your foam can become waterlogged. And you'll know that because it gets extremely heavy, much heavier than it was when you first got your hot tub or the cover. And if you do happen to notice that there's water trapped inside of here, you want to deal with that right away, or it will eventually ruin your cover and you'll have to get a completely new one, which is going to be a minimum of $500. So what I recommend in that case is to go ahead and unzip this, take the foam inserts out, and just allow them to dry naturally in the outdoors. Then with the cover, you're going to want to let that completely dry out also, and you're going to want to inspect inside where the foam inserts go and see if there's any mold or mildew in there, and also use that Tilex kind of product, or maybe a 50-50 mix of bleach and water. And again, wearing gloves, get rid of that. And then make sure it's completely dry before you put the completely dry foam inserts back in and zip it back up again. And if you do have tears in your cover, you're going to want to patch those. I do have an article on my website if you want to check that out, that kind of details how to patch holes in hot tub covers like that. And it tells you everything that you need to know, including links to the Amazon products that I recommend for doing that patching. So check that out right up here. Now, if you're looking for a solution that's a little bit more natural, a little bit less chemical based, you can use a 50-50 mix of white vinegar and water in place of the Tilex or any kind of bleach product. And you can simply spray it on the infected areas, let it sit for about 10 minutes, and then use a sponge or brush to kind of gently scrub it off. And then again, even though this is just vinegar and water, I would still want to wipe that down completely before putting it back onto the hot tub, because you don't want vinegar dripping into the hot tub's water either, as that can dramatically affect the pH. Now, let me move the camera and I'm going to show you some of these areas on my hot tub cover so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about if you haven't seen this yet on your cover. But I guarantee you, you will have this problem at some point. So you can see right along the seam here, there's a little bit of discoloration. There's a bigger spot right there. And it goes further down, and you can just see kind of along the whole edge there, that whole seam, there's little spots like that. On the top of the cover, this cover is relatively new, so there's not too much of it. There's a tiny discoloration there, and some more right there, and some more over here. But I'm going to go ahead and spray those now and allow it to sit so you can watch in real time. Well, I'm not going to make you suffer through real time. So you can see how easy it is to get rid of this stuff. Now, in an ideal world, as I mentioned, I would take this completely off of the hot tub because, again, I don't want this chemical. This is kind of like a Tilex kind of product. I don't want that to get in my hot tub's water. But for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to do a tiny area here so you can see it and so you can see how easy this is to get rid of. Okay, now I'm just going to let that sit for about 10 minutes and we'll be back to wipe it clean and see how much of it came off. Okay, it's now been about 15 minutes since I applied the Tilex kind of product on here, and I let it sit and then I rubbed it with an old rag. Let's compare the section that I worked on right here to the section I didn't work on. Okay, so right here you can see just how clean that looks compared to what's down here on the left where I didn't treat. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hot tub cover completely off. I'm going to set it to the side so I'm not near the hot tub water, and then I'm going to treat the entire thing to get it spotless from top to bottom. Now, if you've got this and you've taken care of it, how do you prevent it from coming back in the future? Well, the first thing I would recommend is make sure you're on top of your water chemistry. That's at least sanitizer and shock weekly, as well as making sure your alkalinity and pH are set. Check those things a minimum of once a week. Then, as I always suggest in my videos, when you do add chemicals, turn the jets on to kind of aerate the water and get it thoroughly mixed, and leave the cover off for at least 20 minutes while you're doing that. That way the chemicals are not splashing up on the underside of the cover with the jets on. Now, if you've really had a heavy session in the hot tub, lots of people over a long period of time, it's a good idea to actually leave the cover off for a little bit once everybody is done. And if you have had a lot of people in the hot tub, way more than usual, I always recommend adding a normal dose of shock the next morning as well. Not sure which kind of shock is best for you, chlorine or non-chlorine. I do have a recent video where I cover the pros and cons of both, and I help you decide which one is best for your situation. So check that out right up here. Then the next thing I recommend for you is do a monthly hot tub cover cleaning, both on the top and the bottom. If you've got a vinyl cover, which is very common, use something like 303 marine protectant, but Armor All will also work. Spray that on the cover and then wipe it with a clean rag. 303 marine protectant is very similar to Armor All, but in my opinion, it's much better. I'm going to leave a link to that down in the description. And then on the underside of the cover, once a month, wipe it down with a mixture of white vinegar and water, 50-50. And that should prevent your cover from ever developing mold or mildew again. And it will keep your cover looking good for a long time and probably extend the life of your cover by at least a year. But you do unfortunately need to replace your cover probably about every 5 to 7 years. Having a hot tub cover lifter will extend the life of your cover as well. And if you're not sure about those, check out this video on my channel where I go into that. And if you're struggling to know whether or not it's time to replace your cover, look for giant tears and rips in your hot tub's cover fabric. That's always going to allow water to get inside the fabric. It's going to waterlog the foam. It's going to cause an excess of mold and mildew buildup inside of the cover, which can be very hard to treat without taking it completely apart. And if you've already done that once, you've patched it once, it's probably time for a new one.